Hi guys, Devon here. So we've got a testing for nationals video. So basically, we're just going to show some end boards of the meta decks and cards we could use to beat them that we're considering. Me and Musa are heading to UK nationals, so we're just considering some cards that could beat them in the side and ways that we would play against them. So going to start with Sword Soul, very popular deck. Very common board is to have something like a level 10 Synchro, Chi Shao, and Blackout. This Barone could be a Chengying. It's usually, sorry, not Changying, a Longyung, the level 10 synchro, which actually hurts us more than a Barone does. It depends whether they went for the 10U line and whether they're Wyram locked by a Shuna. They can often have a hand trap in hand. Usually the on-board presence won't be more than this unless they had a Chowfeng line, which hurts us because we can't make Horus and we can't make Gamma. So main deck wise, we will probably hold Gamma for our turn, because if you Gamma their Moe, you can get punished by an Ecclesia, special Ecclesia, go into tie it, and then you actually make their board stronger, because then they have a Baxia line, I believe. Their board either ends up the same or stronger if you Gamma them, and they have an Ecclesia. And they can sometimes just play through with like a hard drawn Longyung. So it's actually better to hold the Gamma for your turn and hit the Barone, negate on one of your scales, and you can use the Gamma and Driver to go into Borg Blocker to protect your scales from like the Blackout, for example, or you can go into an Omega or a Link 2. Post siding, we're considering cards like Epsilon or like Night Beam, like cards that like answer Blackout, and like cards that answer D Barrier and Anti Spell. And Sword Soul is even starting to side stuff like Rivalry. They side a lot of traps because they can draw two with the Longyung and the Moyi draw two combo if they choose not to play around Nib. And obviously we don't play Nib, so if they get greedy and they can like draw into their floods, like having Epsilon can help us make sure our scales resolve. Lava Golem is a card that we decide into this. Just deal with the bodies. If they have the D barrier or the anti spell, they have it. If they have it, they have it. Sometimes you just got to treat it that way. Once we set up Path versus this deck, we're good. So our game plan is if we can mine them and stall till we get Path, and then we can go for like a small push and we just kind of win at that point. Post siding, we're looking to see cards like Lava Golem and Epsilon. We're not siding that much for this deck, so we feel like this matchup is very easy. Going first and going second, you can steal games with Gamma and Zefra War if you draw enough scales, and obviously mine. So we reckon this is a fairly favourable matchup, and we'll talk at the end of the video with what, like all the cards we're considering. This is the branded board. So this matchup's a bit more difficult. This is like the bread and butter. So often they'll have like at least something else with this. They'll usually have like a like a Dragos Depelia on top, or maybe they have the Makuri in hand for Monster Negate. Uh, Usually the double Masquerade boards or the Masquerade boards in general won't come out until post siding. So usually pre-siding cards we're looking to see is like we are playing Called By. Gamma's still nice because you can hit it on the end phase. You can hit on end phase Albion. Most people aren't prepped for Gamma on end phase Albion. Mine is pretty good versus this deck, so we're considering like multiple copies of Mine in the main. Post siding, we're considering, even though Shifter doesn't end their turn, it's still a pretty good side card. Forces them into doing masquerades. They can't do, like, it's very hard for them to do Branded and Red Chimera on your turn, so your scales will resolve. Playing through double masquerade is very difficult though, but if you can mine them and stall, like maybe you can push for it. But yeah, we side very heavily for this deck because we can Mystic Mine them, but we can never go for a push. We're generally trying to go for a deck out, and if we don't see Mystic Mine, it's kind of hard to win the grind. You can do it, but it requires minimal mistakes, and for them to make some mistakes, which happens because people don't read your cards when you're playing Zefra, so you can always rely on that for a few cheeky dubs. But yeah, we'll talk. Like I said before, we'll talk at the end of the video with what other spicy techs we're running to deal with them. Next, we have Punk Synchro. So this could be Therion. This could be normal Punk Brave. Therion usually doesn't play Brave, but I know that they can. So this could be a Regulus, this could be any of the Therian disruptions. Instead, this could be a hot red. Usually it's like Scythe protected with something. I know the Therian variant is more likely to go for the Calamity, that people are starting to take out of their extra deck. But we'll talk about both of them at the same time because they lose to kind of similar things. Main difference being that Therian's a bit harder for us because Path doesn't shut them out of the game. So we're always trying to like stall for Mine going second. So if we activate Mine, we play through the Cyplock, we bait out the negate on the scales, and then we just activate Mine and we stall for a push. Versus this deck, I think you just wait for Path and then you slowly dismantle the board. Versus Therian, I had a game recently where I went for the same strategy and it worked out very poorly. I think you're better off waiting to pen 6 versus Therian until you can out your own mine. So like until you draw like an Oracle and a Divine Strike set, you try and pen 6 and then you try to go for the OTK with Boral Sword and clear the board because you're not going to win a grind versus a Therion deck, I realized. And you cannot deck out versus that Agario system spell that they play. So those are the differences, but the board going second, the side cards are kind of similar in what we want to side versus them. So we're considering Sphere Modes, Lava Golem, Shifters, all shit on this deck. If you see them, they're very powerful cards. Of course, if they post-siding, they draw a D-Barrier or an anti-spell, then they draw the D-Barrier anti-spell. You can't side for big-ass boards and the Floods. If they see it, they see it. It's very likely that they'll have this board with a hand trap that they got off the Chaos Ruler. They usually have the Snow Engrave. Different variants do different things, and it's all depending on the hand and the player and how well they play it, and how good they are at milling with Chaos Ruler into Snow and Veiler and Nib. So some people are just better than you at the game, so you just gotta accept that sometimes. But yeah, some of the cards like heavy combo board breakers like Lava Golem and Sphere Mode are what we're looking to see versus this deck, along with Shifters. Next up is Thunderies, very fun deck. It's a very difficult matchup because it's a normal summon deck that plays for our Path Floodgate. They can play through counter traps by chain blocking, so it's very annoying. And obviously we're playing Vanity's Fiend, which we're trying to set up game 1 if we can, which they just kind of play through. So we usually accept the L to this deck if we play versus it and we set up Vanities. This matchup is kind of a die roll. You can win going first, they can win going first. The way you win going second game 1 is usually by mining them, but they do have outs in Advent banish their cards as cost until they eventually can banish all their fields. So usually you're not trying to deck out with mine. You're usually trying to wait for an OTK. Barrier statues are a pain to deal with. The risers are a pain to deal with. Usually, a thing you can do is activate both scales, go battle phase. If you had like an Oracle up or a scale you don't care about, you can war the set card because Dreaming Town is only in main phase. If they have multiple sets, then you just got to accept the 50-50. This matchup's very annoying because they side in Featherstorm and Anti-Spell or Featherstorm and D-Barrier. And they even side in Twisters because they usually side out the Shifters for Twisters because they have so many dead cards in versus you, and you also have so many dead cards versus them with Path and Vanity, so you're usually going to side out. We post siding, we're siding in sorry, not Lava Gun. We're siding in Zombie World because we play Pathfinder, so that's just going to FTK versus this deck. If you can protect it with like a Borg blocker or some counter traps, you just protect the Zombie World and you win that matchup. So that's the matchup. We're gonna now talk about some other decks which may be relevant. I'm not going to dedicate a section to them. Just going to talk about them briefly. Sky Striker and Eldritch variants. So Eldritch branded, we don't really care about. Like Path destroys that deck. We do not even side that much back right here. I don't think we side any, like other than like Epsilon. So we don't really care about Eldritch because we just outgrind that deck. The only problem is branded fusion make Mirror Jade beat us down. But if we just survive the onslaught, we're gonna win that grind game very easily. Sky Strike is very similar, but the difference being that they play a lot more flex spots, so they can obviously sack you with enough hand traps. They can sack you with like multiple like board breakers. Sometimes that you exchange a Sky Striker hand and you see Twisters double evenly and then double engine, and you're like, I don't know what to take here. So you can get sacked versus Sky Striker, but generally it's those two are very good matchups, so we don't side too heavily for them. So here are some Zefra considerations. Some cards we're considering playing, some that we're already playing. So cards that we're gonna likely play are Spooky Dogwood and Longing for the time. Post siding, if we won a game through mine or if the game just went long, game 3 we'll side in this if we're going second, Spooky Dogwood, and if we see it, we can win through time or force them to pass. The Longyung, the reason why we play the Longyung, even though the Dogwood's kind of better for the time going second, Longyung is something you can proactively trigger going first, and you can even croc stack it. So if you're going first and you combo, you can go croc stack Longyung, deal 1200 damage, summon a level 10. We don't play Barone because, well, we're not planning on playing Barone because we're budget players, we can't afford it, but we would. So you could set up Barone, you set up Chengying or Longyung turn 1, and then do an extra 1200 damage, you set up the Longyung level 10. It kind of sucks having to side for time, but unfortunately you have to do it, especially if you're Zefra and you're a grind deck. And we do think it's very important to side for time because decks like Branded will set up Masquerade post siding, and they'll just win through time if you don't do this. So, and even Sword do 1200 or 24, 3600 damage. So, cards we're considering siding going first. So we usually side exchange. If you looked at the previous deck list video that we posted. Other considerations versus like decks like Branded, where we need to side in more going first, we were considering non-fusion area because it just cuts them off completely, and Ibli. I actually think Ibli might be better than non-fusion area because it can be sided into other matchups, and it because it summons to their side of the field, they can no longer Lightning Storm, they can no longer Imperm, so it protects your new from Imperm, they can no longer Evenly, and obviously, if they're a deck that doesn't link summon, like Branded or Sword Soul, that they're only out really as like droplets away the Ibli. So it's actually better than non-fusion area. I think it's more versatile. I plan on playing Extrav because I don't have Prosperities, and Musa is going to be playing with Prosperities. So I would probably end up banishing the Almirage, so I wouldn't be able to use the Ibli. So I'm probably going to be siding the non-fusion area. Other potential options are things like D-barrier, but skipping a turn isn't as effective. If we're siding specifically for Branded, we want to be able to skip their game, not skip the turn. Like you can skip their turn easily enough as it is, but you need to be able to either OTK, win quickly, or just flood them out of the game. We're playing mine. We're already playing mine. We're already playing Metaverse, playing Terraforming. The reason why I put it here is because we're considering Demise of the Land. This was in a separate build, and we're no longer playing it. But it is a consideration. Sky Striker topped with it recently. It's very going first. It's a very good going first card, especially if you brick. It just means that you'll never brick. If you make your deck into a mine deck, you will never brick. You have like Metaverse, you have like Demise of the Land, you have like Mystic Mine hard drawn with a war and a Zefra monster. The issue with it, obviously, as in you'll never brick, but going second versus some decks, like they won't summon and then you can negate this. It's not really an issue, but we're just finding that 4 copies of mine with pot cards is usually enough, and we'd rather be able to see engine. Demise of the Land is probably overkill, and I believe people are more prepped for mine now, so it becomes less effective post siding, and we don't want to play too many cards in our main deck that are less effective post siding. The board breakers, like I talked about before, Sphere Mode and Lava Golem. We were on only Lava Golem because Sword Soul, but then we put in the Sphere Mode for decks like Punk that just set up like way too many threats on the board. Clearing 3 bodies is massive to stop them on making an access code next turn, and the fact that you give them a level 8 if you give them Lava Golem means they can sync it off with Formula into Brone, which is funny, which happened to me. So actually just giving them a 0/0 attack body that returns to your side of the field is like much better. Lava Golem time could come up though, take 1000, but yes, generally it's Lava Golem for Sword Soul, Sphere Mode for Punk decks. Just use your own judgment on what to side in. Shifter's already in our side. We're still considering how good Shifter is versus the current decks. I don't have too many side cards going second into Branded, because mine's already good enough, but post-siding they will have outs to mine if they saw it, or if they just believe that Twisters is good versus our deck. So D-Shifter could be potentially turn skipper, but double Masquerades is an issue. But it's very good versus the other combo decks. The reason why it's not in our main is because Sword Soul can just set up Blackout through it. Branded can somewhat play through it. Brave decks can set up a Griffin for it. And Yeah, so it's just it maybe could come back to our main deck as a consideration, but at the moment we've just got it in the side and it's working perfectly fine. Denko Sekra is a card we're considering versus Branded. You normal summon it. If they sided in D barrier, it's dead. If the Branded in red is dead. If the Mirror Jade isn't live, they can't out it. The problem with it, as I showed before, is that they can end on Dragos Depelia, which just negates this, and then everything is live, and all you did was use your normal summon to stop a Dragos Depelia. Other considerations were Night Beam because you just out the Brandon in red straight away and you stop the follow up. So even if they have the Dragos Depelia, you're dealing with the Brandon in red, and if the Mirror Jade had to send the Albion on the following turn, then the only interruption you have to deal with is like a Dragos Depelia or a Mercuria, or maybe a set Dropless or S-Poly. So Night Beam is pretty nice as a consideration. Another consideration is Delta. Delta is pretty good. It gets you the bodies. The problem with Delta is it can be dealt with by Ash, but if you're siding it in versus Branded, they won't have Ash most of the time. Most people are playing like one Ash with Crossout, or if they aren't on Crossout builds, they're generally not playing Ash. A card I forgot to put in here was Epsilon. Card that we're siding, because everyone's siding traps at the moment, so we side in one or two, because we don't want to see too many Psy-Frame cards in conjunction with each other, because you only have one driver, because we already play 3 Gamma, so you don't want to side in too many. But if you see it and it resolves, it's insane. My problem with it is it can get stopped by Ash, so you side it in versus Sword Soul, you do it versus Blackout, and then they have Ash. So maybe Night Beam can be pretty nice for that, but then you get punished by if they summon Barone and they just negate. I mean, they're going to negate the Epsilon anyway, but Barone plus G-Shell plus Trap. So those are considerations. We're probably going to be. Our main deck is pretty much finished on our extra deck. The side deck is still in construction. We're tinkering with the main deck a little bit, whether we want to play 42 or 43 cards. We're probably going to do a mock-up list when we meet up on Friday, and then we're going to decide on it. Other two considerations are Retaliating Sea and Contact Sea versus Branded. I hear that if they can play through Shifter, they're going to be able to play through Retail, I think. The body is potentially nice, but I don't think it's that great. Contact C, I think it's a turn skipper if they don't open a way to like poly, right? So it's a consideration. I didn't pick up any in time, so probably won't be playing it, but it's something I considered and should have tested a bit more. Obviously the Almirage for the Ibli if we're gonna play the Ibli. Gushka we've put in last second because we do play level 4s in the main and sometimes we can summon it, especially if we open Pathfinder. Problem with Pathfinder using it as our normal summon is we can open, so we're playing 2 generally, so if you open Pathfinder with another field spell access, you've just got a dead draw, but Paguska makes it so that you can turn the Pathfinder into a rank 4 if you open that hand, so it's not going to come up often, but it's a thing we considered. It also comes up if you were going to side some level 4s like Denko or Retail, but it's generally for the Pathfinder to make more to give more value to summoning Pathfinder. So you can normal Pathfinder, see if they have Veiler Imperm, and then just turn it into Paguska to either strengthen the board or to crack a board. This one's a bit of a weird one. Cyburst Quantum Dragon. Musha sent it to me last second. I think he had a shower, came out with this weird idea, and then said, talk about this. I don't really know what I'm supposed to say about this. I think it's supposed to have some synergy with the Ibli. Well, you could draw. Yeah, so you return when it attacks, you return the Ibli, and it does double damage. I think he's opting not to do this. I don't think he's picked it up in time, but it was a consideration because you can like bounce your Ibli, do 5k, main phase 2, normal the Ibli again, link it off, give your Ibli back to your opponent, and then you've still locked them while advancing the game state. But I think it's just better if you Ibli lock them to just stall till you build up a big enough pen summon to OTK. But yeah, those are considerations. I did. It does look like I did just puke all over the screen and make a video on it, but these are actually serious Zefra considerations. It's funny that the deck can play so many weird cards, and it's also nice because a lot of these cards are quite budget. So thank you for watching. Peace.